In this new amendment bill, this year signed by President Ramaphosa, powers have been granted to the Minister of Employment and Labour. We have read these and we're here to discuss it today. Hello, Ramon. What do you think of these?
Byron, I'm a little bit gobsmacked. Not because I didn't expect this, but because it is just so blatant what the ANC wants to do. To cut a long story short, the Equity Amendment Bill basically said the Minister of Labour will decide what percentage of people in which province works in which different sectors. If your company is over 50 employees, this will apply to you. So when you think about different sectors of society and in terms of which people work there, the government literally wants a pencil test and literally wants to see your gender before you're actually allowed to work in that particular sector. So one example, of course, is the agriculture, forestry, and fishing. These are the aspirational quotas that the government wants to implement in agriculture. So at national, there is a difference for some reason between African and black on the scale. If you know the difference, please do let me know. The ANC is really keen on African and black people working all over the place in different sectors. So, Byron, in agriculture, you need to have a total of 30% of the workforce in top management in agriculture. But curiously enough, 17.4% need to be male and 13% needs to be female across the country. How on earth is one expected to actually implement that in any meaningful way?
I think that's probably more relevant to look at the Indian category because if you look at the Indian category, apparently the Indians only account for 0.6%, which does mean that if you actually look at it, if you had a company of, let's say, 51 people, and that meant that you were actually now just one person above into the category where these rules apply. Effectively, if you had that company and you employed one Indian, would represent 2% of the, should we say, quota in that business for that racial category, which means that actually you would fall foul of these rules. You would actually be outside of them. You would be breaking the rules. That's rather curious, Ramon, which means that if you have a company of 51 people, employ one Indian, you need to fire your Indian, mate. Like, he needs to go because otherwise you got problems, right?
Or you only sort of employ like half an Indian, right? Like maybe like I don't know, you chop them in half and then you only employ the right hand side. I mean, I don't know what other ways are there to unless you're really smart, then you hire someone who is half Indian and half black. 'Cause that counts sort of 0.5%.
No, but they would be colored then. And then you would be
Oh,
into the colored category, which then would put you into the colored pencil test, which is actually now only 2% of your, obviously, your national quota there, as you can see, or 1.5% if they're female. So, unfortunately, if your Indian that you employed in your business happened to also be a female, and even if you tried to get them into the colored category, you'd still fall foul of the rules because you're only meant to employ 1.5% of your person. So maybe
right.
they were like 75% of female, but actually, like 25% male. We know genders these days, they're very fluid. Maybe that's how you get around it. I don't know, man.
But in all seriousness, right? I mean, this is the greatest feat of racial social engineering I have ever seen in my entire life, right? And we saw the apartheid laws, we saw the laws in Nazi Germany, we saw the laws that all of these hellhole countries implemented over the course of the last, what, 2, 3 centuries. All the Jim Crow laws, the apartheid laws, the Nazi laws, the Kulak laws. I mean, this is really on par with like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, where like anyone with glasses is no longer acceptable in society because they are intellectual. What you have here, Byron, and for everyone else watching, is the ANC literally dictating to the private sector who they're able to employ, under what category of people in terms of race, and what gender you're allowed to employ as well. But Byron, I'm going to put a spanner in the works for you. What's our unemployment rate?
43% on the expanded definition.
Right. So now, if our employment rate is 43%, right, is there an assumption that somehow every single person born in this country somehow miraculously becomes employed pro rata across every sector of society? Is that how the economy works, Byron? You know better than I do.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting to is the thing that we are discussing before the show, right? So if you look at all these targets, there is actually a way that this would work. That is to actually have 100% of employment rate, right? So, I mean, if you actually had 100% employment rate and then you redistributed jobs, and you basically did kind of like a communist idea. This is actually what the communists did. During the communist era, you would basically say to them, right, what job do I get? And they'd say, well, you're a doctor. And you're like, but I don't want to be a doctor. They'd be like, tough, you're going to be a doctor. Right? So that's what happened in the communist era. Hey, who's our labor minister? Oh, yeah, he's a commie. Oh, yeah. So he probably remembers this. Right, but the problem is that if you redistribute the jobs in the economy and you just recut them up, and you say, okay, you're going to do this job now and you're going to do this job now, that makes sense if you have 100% employment. As in, you can practically make it work. I mean, it would be stupid if that's not really what you want to do, and it takes away your individual freedom. But freedom and commie is not really a thing, huh? But the problem with these rules are, Ramon, we don't have 100% employment. We actually have a 43% unemployment rate, which means that according to these rules, what the government is actually attempting to do is to make whole sections or sectors of the economy unemployed. So what you're actually encouraging people to do is to make whole sectors, Indians, coloreds, whites, you're basically trying to make them all unemployed and then basically trying to redistribute their jobs to black people. Now, remind me, Ramon, I'm sure we've seen that happen in South Africa before. When did that happen?
I think it was called apartheid, if I remember correctly. So that's when it did happen. But the DA released a press statement for this particular topic, and they make a very, very good point in terms of basically you are banning the employment of colored and Indian people across the country based solely on their national demographic. Now, I remember I used to go to university not that long ago. In my law school and in my law classes, there was really an overrepresentation of Indians. Marginally, like 40% of the class was Indian, the rest was relatively mixed between white and black and Jewish and all the rest of it. I know that there's a huge impetus in the Indian community, especially the Hindu one, to go to be educated and to go to university and become part of the professional class. This law prevents anyone from having any Indian or colored in their firm if the representation doesn't meet the requirements of the ANC government. Now, how is this not a violation of human rights? How is this not a violation of the deepest constitutional rights that we have in this country? And you know what? Cyril fucking signed this law, right? He didn't have to, but he signed it. So he doesn't know who sent the weapons to Russia, but he knows for sure that 0.1% of people in the insurance industry in the Eastern Cape must be colored. Not more, not less. Otherwise, you fall foul of the law. It's really the worst piece of social engineering I've ever seen in my life, and we shouldn't ever underestimate that.
But here's the problem, Ramon. And I started this all off by reminding everybody the white population in South Africa got richer because it was forced out of the public sector. Mate, I know tons of white people, as do you, that would just love a nice, cushy little public sector job, right? Go there and pen or push at the post office all day. They'd love that. Nothing more than that. But they were forced to go out there and become entrepreneurs. They were forced to become business owners. And in doing so, the entire class of white people, through that form of social engineering, actually became very wealthy because they had no choice. They had to feed a family. They had to make a living. So what's going to happen here, Ramon, is that many of these people that would usually be employed in the in the private sector for companies that have, large corporates where they have like 100, 2, 3, 400 people will now all be sitting there going, you know what, we can't have these large corporates, so let's create a smaller corporate of just 50 people. I mean, we did a whole video on this, right? The way to circumvent these rules is by creating a smaller business, an SME of just 50 people. No more than 50 people, because then you'll be subject to the rules, right? So here's the problem. In doing that, the white people are going to get enriched again, and they're going to become wealthier again, which means that in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're going to have another little sectoral target bullshit where the minister's going to go, oh, see, these people are still running the economy and they hold all the wealth of the country. And what we need to do is we need to get more radical and more draconian on them all over again because, they continue to hold the levers of power. This is what happens when you do social engineering, mate. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't how free markets work.
That's exactly what's going to happen. And, we know that the ANC is not a fan of free markets at all, but really, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, please, this is like the worst piece of legislation I have ever seen in my life. This EWC is nothing. And the fact that they willingly signed it And the fact that they're willingly pushing it really shows a deep disdain for everyone who's not African. ANC fucking hates you guys. Accept that. Thank God they're incompetent
Yeah,
though.
absolutely. And the reality of this is that if you work for a business that takes these targets seriously and doesn't restructure its business to get around these targets, that business hates you too, and you
Mm.
really need to work for a different business. Like this should not be taken lying down. Let's just put it like this, mate. When you know that you look at a piece of legislation and you know that Hitler would have gone, oof, that's a bit draconian, you know you're on the wrong side of history.